start recording. And we're rolling. We're going.
All set? All right. Thanks so much. Hey, my name is Josh Lospinoso, and today I'd like to talk to you about a vulnerability that was patched in one of the major Democrat DNC donor database called NGPVAN that was responsibly disclosed and fixed. So I have to say this, I didn't do this as part of any of my official duties. I'm a DoD person, but I did not do this during my work day. This is done on my personal time, and no thoughts or opinions that I expressed during this talk have been endorsed by you. So who am I? I'm an Army cyber officer. I'm an InfoSec engineer during the day, and also mostly while I'm at home. I keep a blog, and I'm also an aspiring author, so this summer, hopefully, I'll have a book out, so it's Amazon pre-orderable if anybody's interested in C++. Okay, and my talk has 3 parts to it. Most of it will be talking about the vulnerability that I found in the NGPVAN's emailing service. I'll talk about a tool that I wrote that will help you to find similar vulnerabilities using nothing but your inbox and some of the detritus that's lying around from subscription services that you may have had. And then another tool here called Abrade, which is a general purpose web scraping tool that you can scrape web APIs, about 10,000 requests per second or so, depending on your bandwidth. And I will talk a little bit about how you can use this pipeline to find a similar vulnerability. Right. So NGPVAN is essentially like the de facto Democrat donor database and services company, right? So if you are running a national Democratic campaign, chances are you're using NGPVAN services. So the reporting is that they have an exchange agreement with the DNC itself that says basically, in exchange for your data, we promise to give you all the data that we collect, but it's an exclusivity arrangement, so the DNC can't contract with other entities. To give you an idea of just how big the profile is for this company, the Obama campaigns both used NGPVAN, and then also in the 2016 elections, Sanders and Clinton used NGPVAN for all of their mailings. And I mean, who knows if this is true, but there's Motherboard reported that when they were in touch with a person claiming to be Gooch420, the entity or person that hacked the DNC, that they explicitly called that NGPVAN as the first step for how they got into the DNC's network. I mean, that may or may not be true. Okay, so here is an example email coming from a political campaign. I'll draw your attention to parts of this email. The first is this balance.mygp.com, so Google appends that whenever you're using a third-party emailing service, so it's not actually coming from that domain. And you'll see here that this came from ngp.com, mygp.com, and then also that there's an unsubscribe link here at the bottom. So there's something kind of important to talk about at this juncture, which is why they have an unsubscribe link here. And the reason is I don't have an account with NGP, right? I'm just a prospective donor to this political campaign. And so if I wish to opt out of these emails, I don't have any prearranged way of authenticating with the NGP service, right? So it sounds a little obvious, but it has some important implications. The first of which is that this URL has to encode some information in it that like kind of authenticates me, right? That links my email address, because otherwise somebody could just, you know, find my email address on haveibeenpwned.com or whatever, and then log in as me, and that would be a serious problem, right? So something to kind of let marinate for a minute. Well, if you click on one of these unsubscribe links up until late September of last year, they would look like this. And so I don't know if there are any low-level programmers, people that regularly cast numbers about from CPU registers or not, but if you're like me, your spidey senses go off when you see URLs like this, and you're like, oh my goodness, those don't look as random as they seem. So if we take these numbers, which are signed integers, and we put them into a signed representation, take a look at these again, there's not nearly as much entropy in those as it would first seem, right? So they're doing some fast and loose conversions with numbers and just hoping people won't poke into them too much. So here's a little Python snippet for those initiated for how you could do this conversion. It's just taking the signed integer, packing it, and then unpacking it as an unsigned integer. And boom, there you go. Right. Okay, so where do we go from here? Some of you may have already figured what we're going to do. Well, if we looked at these numbers and we said, these really don't look like they have a lot of randomness to them, what happens if we just sort of like increment some of the numbers here and there and see if we can get valid URLs out of them? So I just took like my 8-byte value that NGP gave me and started incrementing the byte that looked like the one they were incrementing to generate these URLs. And converted them back into the format that we would need to use to simulate an unsubscribe link. So again, here's the code for how you do that. This is our generated unsigned integer. We just pack that bad boy into a string and then put it into the appropriate place in the URL. And boom! I'm not interested in Illinois politics, but somebody is, right? So there are a couple of like really bad things about this that I'll let you put the dots together on, but this here has some sensitive information in it that I've dutifully blotted out. We have some email list preferences, and then we can just completely unsubscribe somebody from this list. So what could go wrong? Well, I can think of a number of things. The first of which is, if I do enough of these link generations, I could harvest tens, hundreds of thousands of email addresses and do some interesting stuff with them, right? Maybe if I'm a political operative, I could harvest these emails and then sell them to some other party that would be interested in them. I could do some really interesting spear phishing, right? Like, I've got some pretty intimate knowledge about the things that these potential donors care about, and so I could craft some pretty like bespoke messages to get them to click on things, right? You want to talk about doing some like direct action things? Well, we could unsubscribe donors, over the course of 2 or 3 months leading up to, the big swing of a political season, and then all of a sudden, obviously money's the lifeblood of a campaign. People are losing revenue because they're not correctly advertising to the right people. And of course, you could do things like, just sow distrust in the system by spamming all the donors with, off-looking things and make them, think that the DNC got hacked in a worse way than what we actually have done here, right? Okay, are there any questions about that? Because I'll transition a little bit into some tools, but yeah.
Two numbers.
Yeah.
Between two, like 2 slashes.
Yep.
Was there any second?
Yeah. So what I could divine out of the chief engineer that I reported the vulnerability to is that this was one of the numbers was a shard for which of the servers the emails were sitting on. But to be honest, I mean, you're just, when you're poking around doing this, what is essentially dynamic analysis on this web service, you're just kind of like poking around until you see this, and then you stop. So,
changing the second action, so you actually get failures because you might be looking at it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had success with this portion and not with this one, but I would imagine, if I had 50 friends who got these DNC emails, I could also collect their shard numbers and then go to town on their, on theirs. Okay.
You only have 1 byte of entropy there.
Oh yeah, it's super bad. I'll show you just how bad it is. So this gentleman mentioned entropy. Well, that's exactly how you need to think about these, and this will get into the admonitions I have at the end of the talk. So I put this little tool together called Unfurl, and the basic idea is we're going to give it a bunch of URLs. Because URLs have a very well-defined format, we'll parse them out into their component parts. We'll group them because, like, you might have multiple different web resources that are associated. And then we'll estimate something called the information entropy of each of the tokens. And then the big idea is we'll triage the URLs that have really low entropy, because those are the ones that we might be able to spoof, right? So what does that mean? Well, this is a super, super, super simplified version of what information entropy is, because there's, an entire field of mathematics dedicated to this idea. But the big idea is, say we had this like random source that was a stream of the letters A, B, C, and D. The question is, how many bits would I need to dedicate to encode that information, right? And you can see clearly here that the answer is 2, because given 2 bits. So given 2 bits, I can exhaust all of the different possible outcomes of this random process, right? And so that is not a precise mathematical definition, but for the purposes of this talk, that's sufficient. And so obviously, if you have low entropy in these URLs, I can generate random bits that may or may not be valid, right? And that's the big idea. So what we want to do is take in a collection of URLs, see how much information entropy is in those URLs, so that I can categorize them for you as an attacker, and then you can do further triage from there, right? You can see the trees, individually. Okay, so to give you an idea how it works, it's a command line program. You just invoke it with the file or files that you want to pass in. Here's an example. So this is live URLs that don't work anymore after the patch, but this is what the URLs might look like for the NGPVAN service. And I'd have a series of these files. You can get them from your inbox or from wherever. And Unfurl is going to go through and parse these and give you this beautiful output. So what does this say? Well, it tries multiple encodings on each of the tokens in these URLs, right? So some common encodings in URLs. Hex, so hexlified things, the digits 0 through 9, A through F. Base 64 encoding is really popular. And then various kinds of unsigned, signed integer conversion things, right? So it'll try to do all these and then see what the entropy is, and then just take the encoding that produces the lowest entropy. That makes sense? And so you can see here it tried hex, unsigned int, and signed int with some success. All of them, all 620 of the URLs I gave it, it was able to decode as a signed int, and then you get an idea of it failed a lot when it tried to parse them as hex because there were characters outside of the range and those sorts of things. And so this is telling me that there are about 25 bits of entropy in this token. And if you've done some system programming, you know that that's not very much. You could iterate through 25 bits worth of integers in like a microsecond, right? So this is something that I would certainly want to investigate, right? Any questions about that? I know it's okay. Yeah, and then so the last part is now that we're able to generate all these URLs, how do we test them to see whether they're actually valid or not, right? Because we're just sort of shooting in the dark and seeing into this black box and then seeing what comes out, right? So abrade is a little project written in C++ that uses Boost's ASIO library, which is the asynchronous I/O. So it's super, super, super fast, and it only takes a single thread because it's all asynchronous I/O. It works as a SOX5 client, which means it works with Tor. So if you run a local Tor instance on your box, you can connect abrade through Tor and then gain the advantage of spamming the service from hundreds of exit nodes rather than from your house, for example. Supports TLS, and then if you, depending on whether you're interested in the content of those URLs or just the fact of whether that URL is valid or not, you can really speed things up by only giving a head request because it won't have to, pull all the data down. So yeah, this is just like the sample usage. You've got the host. There's a whole patterning system that I won't get into here because we're going to just pipe output we're going to pipe output into abrade. But you can, like, in a declarative syntax, like say, I want all integers from 0 to 10 million, and then it'll iterate for you. It's kind of neat, and it'll compute entropy and different things. And then it's got a bunch of options for, like a shortcut for I want to use Tor, or yeah, please use TLS, or don't. And then it has some optimization things where it tries to see how many requests in flight to have at any given moment to maximize the throughput. So you could, up until September, you could have run this little hack yourself and everything that's up on the screen. So this script here is what generates all the URLs. This is all that's required to pull all the donor database information down. You're just iterating through that number that I showed you from 0 to however many. It's packing those numbers together to yield you the signed integer, and then printing it out, and that's it. So it prints the URLs out for you, and then we're piping that into abrade. This configuration is using Tor, and it's screening out any response that says "we're sorry" because that means it was a link that didn't exist. And that's it. That will generate for you a directory full of all of the email addresses of all the donors in that database, as well as all their email preferences and URLs to unsubscribe them. Okay, any questions about that? Otherwise, I'll get into some admonitions. Yeah?
Just curious, what's the minus telescope?
Oh, yeah, so that gets into, that gets into the declarative syntax for how to generate URLs. The telescoping is like, say I have all the alphanumeric characters of length 4. If it telescopes, that means it'll do all the ones of length 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4. If it doesn't, then it'll only do of length 4. And I'll give you a link to a blog post where all this information is. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, all this stuff is mine. I have blog posts. It's all on GitHub. I can share all that with you at the end of the talk.
Quick question. In the big list of URLs you showed before, so 2 of those have referral codes stuff in them. Did you get any more kind of data from those?
All kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah. There's like I think this is for internal tracking. Like they want to see which campaign codes and things, but they're too lazy to like encode that on the back end, so they just like shoved it into the URL.
Okay.
I don't know.
How did you get that many URLs? Were they sent to you, or?
Yeah. There's a script in the blog post where you can just locally put your Gmail credentials and use this script to interact with the Gmail API to pull all this stuff.
I'm just curious if your tool came during your research or after?
After.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like at the kitchen counter, like, man, I'm like getting all these emails, and then I clicked on it, I was like, that doesn't look right. Like, so this came after.
Cool. You might be getting into this, but I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about if you're just looking at process.
Yeah, sure, I can absolutely do that. So it was super informal. I had a friend who knew somebody at NGP Van, and I texted him and I was like, "Hey, can somebody give me a call really quickly?" And I walked him through, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, you caught us. Like we were going to fix that later, but we didn't." So they fixed it within a week. It was really simple.
Fix it later.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Closed we've got this before. Did they give you the impression that they clearly do exist internally? Other people disclose this before?
Yeah, so they could have, and maybe they had been working on a fix, and then they just gave me the, oh my goodness, we didn't know. I have no idea. Okay, so that gets into admonitions, right? Like, how do you not get burned by this if you run like an email service, right? Well, the short answer is one of these. You guys know what this is, right? It's a GUID. Just generate GUIDs, right? Globally unique identifiers. I think they have like 128 bits of entropy or something insane. Like, generate one of those, save it in a database, And then when someone clicks that link, just correlate the GUID to that user. And you're done. And none of these attacks will work because there's way too much information in here for me to scrape it, right? If you don't want to do that, you should do that. But so authenticate whenever possible. So if you have like a user account, just have the user, click on mycompany.com and then log in, and then they can manage from there. That's definitely a good way to do it. Or roll your own high entropy custom random URL thing. But at any rate, you shouldn't really be displaying any user info from like just a click, right? Because if somebody passively collects that email or figures out a way to generate some part of your URLs, you don't want to be leaking customer data, to the attacker. There's just no reason for it, right? And then finally, this is kind of a band-aid, but it was kind of a pain for me when I was trying to scrape this. So NGPVan did use a scraping service. So they generally they'll be like one of these the CDNs, the delivery networks that they'll put in front of their service, and then they can rate limit you based on some heuristics. But that's just a cat and mouse game, right? Like they're mostly concerned about delivery times and making sure that there's availability. And so if you put enough effort in, you're going to get around them. All this stuff is in blog posts. So if you just go to the these slides are on there's a URL, this jlospinoso.github.io/BSides2018, and you can get all these. But I have a blog post about the vulnerability, about the entropy estimating tool, and then also about the web API scraper. And there's some fun examples on here. So I don't know if you know this. If any of you have like a Ring doorbell, they have a really low entropy URL for the publicly shared videos. And they have like no mechanism for access controls. So if you are bored on a Sunday, get a 6-pack, you can like scrape some Ring doorbell URLs, and it's kind of fun. And they don't care. I reported to them. They didn't care about it. They're like, yeah, the users. We alerted the user that this is a public URL. Like, okay, man, whatever.
That's for stuff the users purposely make public.
That's right. Yeah. Yes.
Or they're private.
Right. Or accidentally clicked on to make it public. There's no way to revoke the access, but whatever. So that's fine. It's the outside of the house most of the time. And then all of these are up on GitHub. So if you want to pull those down. And then I should also mention the EFF is awesome. Like if you have a project where you need to disclose a vulnerability or something like that, and you're worried like about the interaction with the company or whatever, these two guys are awesome professionals, and they can walk you through the entire process. And then the pro bono, they'll protect you in case one of the companies comes after you for. Sorry, I know we're running a little short on time, but
Could you flip back to the GitHub?
Yeah.